Hey guys, gonna do the live reading of chapter 10. I almost forgot today, which I've just been so damn busy lately trying to get the writing portion of Damn It Bree finished up. I'll have that done by the end of this month, and then it'll go off to the editor. Order of the Trident 1, I've had it sent into Edward Gellert, he's the amazing writer and editor who did book 2. So the books ought to match a little bit better. And, once again, I'd like to apologize for missing the last 2 weeks. I've just been swamped with stuff. But hopefully we'll get back on track. Blog post will go live tomorrow. It covers a little bit of what I've been doing past couple weeks. But let's get this done so I can get back to doing what I do. Chapter 10, The Tyrant. The early morning sun beamed down through the trees, glistening off the layered dew. The snap of branches echoed through the forest, accompanied by the crunch of leaves. Naziel rolled over and opened his eyes, careful to keep from blinding himself. Listening intently to the echoing sounds, he whispered a quiet incantation to himself. Feeling his clothing fall into place around his body, he stood and waved away the summoned bedroll. It returned back into the leaves it had once sprung. He threw his hood overhead and grabbed his few belongings. Making his way towards the noises, he was careful not to be seen or heard. Cautiously, he climbed the ravine and followed after, delving deeper into the Alfarian homelands. A new sound echoed with the others, a voice unknown to him, but familiar enough to understand. A smile crept to his face. Language meant intelligence. Intelligence meant purpose. They clearly weren't Merkafar, which meant they were trespassers, same as him. That meant there was a chance for an allegiance. Without sound, he moved closer, stopping on the edge of a small clearing in the now dense forest. Inside the grove, 3 large creatures stood, arguing amongst themselves. Seeing the beast, he recalled the language in which they spoke. He hadn't studied Orcish since his younger years, but it seemed the knowledge had stayed with him. He watched, learning the creatures. It wouldn't favor him to give away his position prematurely. They stood nearly 7 foot tall and had thick tusks protruding from their lower jaw. A heavy hide armor protected their chest, and light leather and fur wrapped around their forearms and legs. The exposed skin of their faces and hands was stained brown. That meant they were from the Eastern clan, Naziel recalled. This lot was mostly hunters and gatherers, but they had relations with the Northern clan, which constantly required them to pass through the Alfarian forest. Naziel noticed 2 of them were younger due to the lack of wrinkles and scars on their skin and armor, whereas the last stood nearly 6 inches taller with long white hair and a battle-worn face to match. Penthouse letters. We'll say that we published those under a different name. That's right there with all my porn. Let's see. Each one carried a large weapon nearly as tall as its bearer. The thick wooden handles were decorated with leather and carved markings, meaningless to those outside Orc society. The thick axe head protruded from one side, wide enough to chop a human in half with a single swing, and a heavy mallet stuck from the other, perfect for crushing anything unfortunate enough to be within range. He'd never seen an orc before, knowing their race only by the stories he'd heard and the books he'd read. These creatures, while large and brutish in appearance, were much more than they seemed. He couldn't help but wonder how much timber these 3 could clear if they turned their axes toward labor rather than combat. This forest probably wouldn't last long against an army of lumberers. But such tasks were rarely mentioned in his books. The orcs, even the brown ones, lived in a constant state of battle, whether with other races or among their many tribes. The past 1,000 years they'd focused their ferocity against the Merkafar, holding them responsible for their ostracism to the north. Naziel gave himself a light slap, forcing him to abandon his entire recollection of their history. The orcs spoke their guttural deep tongue, unaware they were being stalked. He watched quietly, unsure how to approach them. The wrong action could result in his death if he wasn't careful. Coming to a decision, he stepped from the dense trees and revealed his covered form. ensuring he had distance if they decided to charge. The sun instantly burned into his flesh, but he forced the pain aside, hoping it wouldn't show to the proud warrior race. The largest of the three grunted, raising his axe to a defensive position. The younger two followed suit. "I'm not here for a fight," Naziel announced in their native tongue. "I know of your feud with the Alfar, and I do not wish to interrupt that. I do, however, need to travel deep within these lands. If you can help me with that, I will aid you against them." The large orc lowered his axe slightly, but kept it ready. Replying in Undercommon, his deep voice echoed, having trouble forming the words around his tusk. "Why would I need your help?" The commander was much more than he'd initially thought. His mind racing, he continued, sticking to Orcish. "Because I have problems with the Merkafar same as you, and I have something you don't." He let a smirk come to his face. The large orc cocked his head slightly. "And what would that be?" Naziel lifted his arms, facing the palms of his hands out toward the trees. Two of the younger orcs jumped back in fear, watching a cone of flame shoot from the young Jurofar's hand. It sprayed out, engulfing one of the large trees. In a heartbeat, the ancient tree was completely ablaze. Its autumn-brown leaves turned black and rolled up to be carried off by the wind. Naziel knew it wouldn't take much to ignite the entire forest. Keeping his hands pointed at the tree, he whispered a different incantation. A jet of water shot from him, soaking the fiery tree, drowning the flames to little more than a cinder. The large orc smiled, his lips stretching tight around his tusk. "Maybe we have use for you. Prove your worth, and we'll make sure you reach your destination." Naziel forcefully returned the smile, hoping he could trust the brutish creatures, though it would be dishonorable for them to betray him, and honor was the one thing their culture held most sacred. Late into the day, the group traveled deep into the forest heart. The air was thick and sticky from the lingering heat of the warm climate. They followed the river as closely as they could. It cooled the air and kept them on track, though it had to be abandoned due to the occasional Alfaran outpost or patrol. Naziel trekked along behind the orcs. He was growing tired from their rapid pace and refusal to take a break. He couldn't blame them. Their numbers meant that they could be found much easier than a lone traveler. But it didn't change the fact that they were conditioned for such strenuous travel, where he was still just adjusting to it. The orcs led him to a well-traveled path deep in the forest heart. "This is Heavenwood. We have to keep our eyes open now. The Alfar here aren't like the others we've encountered. Here they travel in large groups and will attack on sight." Naziel nodded his understanding to the lead orc, and the others they'd encountered hadn't offered much resistance, being eliminated before they could call for help. But that didn't mean it wasn't difficult rooting them out. His magic had proven invaluable in their advancement, having caught the Alfaran scouts off guard. But as far as he was concerned, it was more of a matter of luck than skill. He felt a rumble in his stomach. If the Merkafar were more organized in these parts, what chance did they have to make it through without having to deal with the whole populace? Naziel was beginning to feel a strange sense of belonging, something he'd never truly felt before. He didn't know if it was because the orcs so far had respected his abilities, or simply because he was traveling with them as an equal. Either way, he was glad to have their company. He still didn't know if he could trust him, playing every possible scenario in his head, but trust and respect didn't have to be mutually exclusive. "I'll be prepared if they turn against me. If they don't, I'll still be ready." They traveled for nearly 4 days, leaving them just under 2 from the ruins of Eldarion. Naziel couldn't help but think of everything that stood between him and the knowledge he sought. Trees, Alfar, orcs, unknown obstacles, vicious animals. Something's not right. The orcs marched through the forest, unaware of their companion's halt. 3 distinct swishing sounds echoed from the trees overhead, followed by just as many thuds. Naziel tried to call out, but it was too late. One of the younger orcs dropped his war axe and fell to his knees. The heavy mallet smashed hard into the ground, landing with the axe head pointing straight up. 3 bloody arrowheads protruded through the newly formed holes in the back of his hide breastplate. Small streams of blood ran from each of them. The lethally wounded orc fell face forward to the ground, his head landing directly on the sharp edge of his axe, splitting it in 2. The remaining orcs, in a defensive stance, scanned the forest, searching for their unseen attackers. Naziel knew he wouldn't be able to warn his comrades, nor locate the Alfar without help. Closing his eyes, he recalled a spell he'd learned from one of his many books. Finding the words, he looked into the treetops and slammed his hands together. The sound of his clap sent a wave of energy in its place. Like a strong wind, it blew debris in all directions, breaking the surrounding trees at their bases and sending them away from him. The wave knocked the orcs prone, forcing its way past them. Naziel watched the sonic blast clear the forest in all directions for nearly 50 feet, leaving the once hidden Alfar to pick themselves up from the forest floor. He counted a dozen of the long-eared, majestic creatures scrambling to get back to their feet. The orcs recovered, gripping their weapons to slaughter the exposed Alfar. They rushed to the right side of the now clear trail, bringing their weapons down as quickly as possible. The closest Alfar was cut in two before his sword left its sheath. The superior numbers had to be whittled down or they would be overcome. Naziel saw the anger on the large orc's face, certain some of it was directed at him, having been affected by the magics, same as the Alfar. The large orc swung his war axe, smashing another Alfar with the mallet side, sending his distorted body flying uncontrollably through the air. The younger orc took position behind his commander, keeping his back protecting his own. Keeping his back protected with his own. He swung fiercely, cutting down another, dancing as he'd been trained. The pair tore into the still recovering Alfar, hacking, slashing, all within their reach. Naziel looked around. The orcs had the largest portion covered, but there were still several of the slender would-be assassins all around them. He saw a group to his left, their weapons drawn and headed straight toward him. He thrust his hands forward, sending energy into the air. It wrapped around the approaching group, solidifying and forcing them together. Contorting his fingers, he made the proper gestures and recited the words, calling the power to him. A cone of bright orange and yellow flame shot from his fingertips as he displayed to the orcs upon their meeting. Screams echoed from the flaming figures, slowly being devoured in their prison. They ran into each other, desperately trying to escape the invisible walls containing them. Continuing to move, after death, they crumbled into several heaps of charred meat, nothing left but smoldering bone and gore. Naziel scanned the area. The few remaining Alfar joined the battle against the orcs, attempting to surround them. Drawing his saber, Naziel moved behind the group, hoping to avoid the broken branches and debris on the forest floor. His plan would fail if he couldn't remain quiet. He moved into position and thrust his sword into action. A series of quick slashes and stabs, he cut the Alfar down before they realized his presence. The battle was over quick, leaving the dead to litter the forest floor. The large orc glared at him, choosing his words before speaking. "I'm grateful you exposed their location, but I expect warning before you act. I cannot anticipate chaotic decisions." His deep voice echoed between breaths. He was exhausted, but clearly trying to hide it. Naziel felt regret with the commander's words, but it was meaningless. Forced to make the same decision, he had no doubt he would have done nothing different. "I'm sorry I caught you off guard, but I couldn't think of a better way to force them out of hiding. It was that or risk losing the element of surprise." The old orc placed his large hand on Naziel's shoulder. The size made him look small in comparison. "Overall, I'm glad to have you on my side," he said, allowing a bestial smile to tighten around his tusk. They piled the bodies at the center of the clearing, away from the now shattered trees and foliage. Naziel held his hands over the pile, channeling his energies. The bodies burst into flames, burning to ash in a matter of minutes, leaving nothing but a few charred remains behind. Entangled vines and vicious barbs stretched from tree to tree, far removed from the remnants of any trail. The overgrown brush was nearly untraversable, slowing them to a near stop. The orcs heaved their axes, tearing into the brambles more than cutting. Several hours passed, carrying them along into the night. The moon loomed overhead, blocked out by the thick canopies, leaving them in near darkness. The three continued onward, their eyes accustomed to the lack of light. Naziel studied the faint outline beyond the trees. It looked like the top portion of an ancient temple, but he was still too far to tell. Even at this distance, it towered over everything around it, leaving him to wonder how such a landmark could remain unexplored for so long. It's not like its location was unknown, so why had there always been such mystery surrounding it? One thing was certain, those questions would be answered very soon. They traveled in the morning, watching the sun illuminate the forgotten city before their eyes. They passed into the lands that were once streaming with his kind, the Dalarai before them. Naziel stared in wonder, excited to be so close to his ancestors' home. There was something about the place that called to him, something that made him feel powerful, something that made him feel as if he could snuff out the sun with a single thought. The power was so intoxicating, he almost hadn't realized its absence of all life in this once populated site. Listening, he could hear nothing but the sounds of his companions. Not even the chirp of a bird nor the fiddle of a cricket could be heard in the desolate city, leaving an eerie silence over the dead lands. They continued in, chopping their way through the overgrown brambles. The dry wood cracked and broke into several pieces, unnerving them farther. It was so different from the resilient vegetation they'd traveled through moments before. Naziel could see the forest edge just ahead. Excitement filled him, growing with each step towards the large clearing. They crossed into the cleared landscape, lost in the sight before them. A dark shadow loomed overhead, blocking out the sunlight, leaving a perpetual gloom. Several ruined structures towered throughout the city, left to the elements. Of the many stones making the majority of the many of the large stones making the majority of the structures had fallen, nearly buried by time and dirt. The ground was bare and free of weed and grass. Only dry, cracked earth covered the floor in all direction. Even the trees branching over into the clearing were dead, their limbs petrified and jagged. Welcome to Eldarian, the birthplace of my people. Naziel passed the orcs, leaving them to take in the sight. He thought it strange, considering the amount of overgrowth not 100 feet away, yet the city itself was void of all life, save for his group. He walked toward the center, eyes locked on the one structure that remained untouched by time. The orcs followed slowly, their axes ready for the unexpected. Such a place was unnatural. It was best to be prepared if anything remained. The tomb stood tall, jutting into the sky like some sort of dark temple. It was made of black-colored stone, appearing to have sprouted from the ground. A dark cloud wrapped around the peaks of the spire, hiding it from view. The occasional bolt of lightning flickered within, but it remained steadfast, entrapped by the gloomy shadows blanketing the area. Naziel watched the other clouds drift past. Strange that one defies, he thought. He approached a thick stone cover embedded in the side. Scanning the obelisk, several chiseled symbols appeared to him, like they'd been there forever, only hidden from view. He ran his fingers across them, feeling the rough texture and indentations. Understanding their meaning, he read aloud, listening to the story flow from him. Tides clash against the shore, unleashing new revelations. In that time, the youngest was split, as all things are. Creation sobbed, her tears unheard. Only the three could restore what was lost, but ignorance is a curse, even among gods. In their opacity, they sealed their fates. Beyond this door lies their greatest betrayal. The ground roared and shook violently. Vibrations rattled and pulled against the spire, tearing the earth at its base. A crack splintered through the stone, shooting out like a spider web. It fell to pieces, littering the ground beneath it. Obscured by dust, the outline of a large doorway remained. Naziel fanned the dust from his face, hoping to get a better look at the sealed door. Waving his hand, he let his magic flow forth, embracing the obvious heavy stone. To his surprise, it didn't work. He was certain the magic had taken effect, but the door didn't budge. He placed his hand against the seal, feeling his magic flow into the dark structure. That's odd. What's wrong? The orc commander watched uneasy over the entire situation. Oh, it's my magic. It's like the stone's absorbing it. I've heard a few myths of such an orb, but never found evidence to its existence. That is, until now, anyway. He pressed lightly, feeling the seemingly heavy slab rotate with ease. Studying its construction, he guessed it was pinned and counterweighted. How else would something so heavy move so freely? I need to go inside alone. When I return, we'll continue to your destination. The old orc nodded his acknowledgement and turned to watch the perimeter. Damn it. turned the wrong page. I wasn't quite ready for that. Naziel stepped through the doorway and into the shadows. Instantly, his eyes felt better. The bright sunlight had left him with a mild headache for days now. The darkness seemed to relieve the pressure. He marched through the Nethrix. Fuck, I don't know what that word is. It means the opening room of a church. Thank you, Google, by the way, for helping me with that one whenever I put it in here. He marched through the Nethrix and looked around the open chamber. Several doors lined both sides of the room. The ceiling was beyond sights, but surely the heights of this place wasn't wasted on the 3 layers of balcony he could see. Crossing the nave, he reached the shrine at the far side of the room. The symbols held a familiar presence, but one he couldn't place. Reaching into his satchel, he pulled the broken amulet, feeling energy that wasn't there before. It led him to one of the side rooms containing a stairwell and little else. The amulet nearly buzzed with excitement. He stepped onto the stairs. His vision faded, leaving him in total darkness. This is new. No sooner than the words left his lips, both sides of the ancient passageway flared to life. Every several steps, a sconce was secured to the wall, glowing with a purple flame. Stepping into the unnatural light, he traveled down for what felt like forever. The narrow passageway opened into a single chamber, revealing a large statue standing near the center. The figure was shaped like a man, wearing heavy armor and a shiny purple cloak made from the same kind of living material. The thick, jagged armor was molded perfectly, covered in places by the cloak. The raised hood concealed much of the facial features, obscuring the figure's race. Its hands rested on the pommel of a large sword, the lower portion buried beneath the stone base. It peered down, watching the entrance to the chamber with lifeless eyes. "What do you want, Brie?"
Never mind about the cake, just say.
Okay, shut my door, please. Naziel approached, looking under the hood, trying to see any details of who or what it may have been. An overwhelming sense of dread washed over him. Unable to turn away, he stared into the figure's consuming eyes. An unbearable desire to flee overcame him, but he was too scared to move. His will consumed, he forced himself to break contact, forcing the dreaded desire to abandon him. Avoiding eye contact, he noticed something hidden beneath beneath the living stone. A pendant dangling around its neck. He moved closer, attempting to get a better look. The sight of the broken sigil shocked him. The familiar emblem called to him, begging to be rejoined. He clenched his fist. His clenched fist raised of its own accord, displaying the broken piece dangling from the thin black chain. It twisted and aligned, revealing the complete symbol to him. Ripping free of his hold, it sealed itself to the other piece. Curiosity gripped him. He stepped towards the statue and lifted the assembled icon. It came free. He pulled it free and placed it around his neck by the chain he carried it on. Glancing up, he was much closer to the figure than he realized. He tried to move, but it was too late. It lunged forward and grabbed him. He struggled against the large stone gauntlets, clenching to the sides of his head. He could feel the warm blood running down from its grasp, pulling him closer, forcing him to stare into its face. A purple glow burned into him, melting away his mind with each passing moment. He flailed his legs, trying to reach the ground, but he couldn't feel it. He tried to pry against the stone fingers, but they were too tight. His body betrayed him, and he fell limp. A pain unlike any other shot through his head, dwarfing the melting purple light by comparison. The chamber, the statue, the glow, all of it faded from sight, leaving him in a calming serenity. Even the pain he felt burning through his body took the form of pleasure. He was lying broken in the desert sands. Two extremely powerful beings towered over him. He felt a kinship toward them, a connection he'd never known. They were brothers. He was beaten, unable to stand. His mind rushed with the desire to lash out, desire to kill the two beings, both frail-looking old men. The older was well dressed, wearing the robes black as night. He held his weight on a long handle of a wicked-shaped scythe made from bone and steel. His eyes washed over him, full of conflict, disappointment, and support. The other held himself against a tall staff, weathered in places, but constantly renewed. His face was wrinkled by time, but his eyes held a youth known only to an infant. He couldn't help but feel lost in them. He wore bronze robes trimmed in a black stone-like material. "Osmodeus, Osiris, my brothers, nothing you do can stop me. I will return, and when I do, your followers will be lost to you." Naziel heard the words escape his mouth, but he didn't know why he said them. The two men looked down on him. He could feel their thoughts. He could smell their remorse and pity. A strange energy grabbed hold of him, pulling him from their presence. He tried fighting against it, but it was too strong. He shut his eyes, screaming his anger at his brother's betrayal. Opening his eyes, the pool disappeared. Staring out over a dark new world, he watched legions of followers drop to their knees at the mere mention of his name. It was good they knew their rightful place. Unfortunately, there were many in the south that evaded his influence. They would suffer like no other had. He felt the powers flow through him. Spreading his wings, he shot into the heavens, ascending to his rightful godly stature. Flying over the graying clouds, he soared to the south, positioning himself over the heretics. He forced his will toward their destruction. His magics wouldn't obey, like they were trapped between realms. He could still feel them, but they couldn't affect the mortal planes. Screaming his discontent, he cursed his brothers one last time. If he was going to crush these infidels, his followers would have to do it for him. The world shifted again. The lands were decimated. Armies of gray orcs marched through the people of the realm, slaughtering any and all within their path. They were commanded by several men clad in black robes and armor. Several strands of a wicked purple and black energy flowed from him and into the armored men below. They redirected the energies into his will. It was easy to tell who held complete faith in his divine right and who doubted his presence. The strands wouldn't lie. Within minutes the world was his, leaving only the persistent southlands beyond his rule, protected by a collection of Alfar men and dwarves. Again the world shifted, and again, each time filling him with knowledge. He witnessed an eternity of events, watching each one as if he was the source. He felt his sanity slipping away, replaced by bits of knowledge too great for any living being to possess. And then suddenly, as quickly as he had disappeared, he was back, standing over the crumbled statue. He fell to the stone floor, feeling the last bits of information settle into place. Looking around, the once living cloak was crumbled with the rest, its fading purple glow disappearing from sight. Taking a deep breath, a single piece of stone remained intact, its glow holding strong. He reached down and picked up the single shard among the rubble. Inspecting it, it appeared to have been split from the statue years before, as a light layer of moss was beginning to claim the rough break. He felt the power rush through him, flowing into the fractured piece. Shifting before his eyes, the jagged piece elongated and thinned, retaining its curvy waves. A moment later, a purple blade with a black hilt sat idle in his hand. Admiring the kriss, he felt the remnant energy flow through the blade, trapped inside the material. Fingering the hilt, he spotted a broken setting where a gemstone once rested. Now that's annoying. Why can't they give me the key to limitless power? Or why give me the key to limitless power only to have it crippled by an incomplete bridge? Nevertheless, it was his, and he belonged to it. Urgency called him. He glanced at the mirror, knowing what secrets remained on the other side. Recalling his purpose, he shook the thought from his head. He had to find the other one. Azara would be freed. Stuffing the dagger into his satchel, he turned to rush up the stairs. The two orcs waited patiently outside the dark temple, looking into the deserted city around them. The little sunlight that pierced the dark clouds faded when he stepped from the chamber. He locked eyes on the orcs patiently awaiting him. They seemed much smaller than he recalled. He glanced at the darkening sky. It felt good to stand in the sun without the constant pain. The large orc stepped toward him. "You look different." "Find what?" His words fell short. Naziel placed his hand on the old orc's breastplate. A smile crept to his face. The thick hide began to contort and turn black under his touch. The orc screamed, feeling his body burning beneath the armor. He tried in vain to get the straps loose, but they burned him further. He fell to his knees with the loss of muscle, tried to take a final breath, but it would not come. Falling forward, his charred body crashed into the ground with an explosion of ash. The distorted husk was all that was left of him. Phenomenal cosmic power, George. Get it right. And itty-bitty living space. Naziel glanced at the younger orc. He stared in horror, watching his commander's body blow away on the wind. He raised his axe and charged the treacherous Druafar. Bringing the thick blade down, all of his strength in that single blow, he hoped to cut the mage in half. Naziel's smile grew wider at the inexperienced orc's attempt. Clapping his hands together, he caught the thick cutting blade moments before it would have bit into his skull. The orc stared in confusion. How can such a small creature stop the strength of an orc? His shocked expression turned to worry. Fear crept inside him, feeling the pain take hold in his arms. He tried to release the axe, but his hands wouldn't comply. He felt it flow into his chest. The orc watched his flesh turn to stone before his very eyes. It passed into his legs, and moments later he was fully engulfed, his eyes locked on the smug Druafar, less than an inch from the edge of his axe. Naziel looked up at the fading sun. He took comfort in its inability to harm him. With a final glance at the eternal orc, he turned and disappeared, leaving the living statue all alone in the abandoned city. The young orc silently wept, unable to give his fear voice. He stared blankly at the open tomb, wondering if he would ever see another living being. The dark passageways were full of Druafar, each one avoiding him. They cowered when he was near, moving away as quickly as possible, keeping watch until he was out of sight. Naziel marched through the catacombs. The smell of dirt and fear caressed his nostrils. He wasn't sure why they feared him. Maybe it was due to the power that coursed through his veins. Doesn't matter. I have a job to do, and they'll help me or be swept away by my prosperity. He rounded the narrow corner and spotted the Elder's chamber just ahead. Approaching the sealed slabs, he released his power. The heavy stone exploded, leaving the chamber open for entry. The elders were sitting in their chairs, surprised by the intrusion. Many jumped to their feet, watching him storm into the room. Naziel, what's the meaning of this interruption? Do you think these actions will go unpunished? Elder Cronus jumped up in a fit of rage at the intrusion. I've returned as I said I would. His wicked smirk formed on his lips. Nadelia smiled. I see you've succeeded in your task. This is good. I'm glad that you've accepted the mantle set before you. Naziel felt a fondness for the vicious old woman. She was just as dangerous as the rest of them, but she had a vision similar to his own. The rest of the elders were petty and inquisitive. He had no purpose for them. I've discovered a great many things since I last stood before you. I now know who I'm searching for and what I must do to free him. The chamber filled with whispers, each one attempting to conceal their thoughts. He found it amusing, the efforts they took to hide their motives. The attempt was fleeting. He knew what they were going to say before they did, but it was still entertaining. Each of them schemed against him, all except Nadelia. The old witch sat quietly, waiting for him to continue. It might behoove you to know that I've also learned something none of you were aware of, he interjected, silencing them. Well, that's not entirely true. I've learned a great many things none of you were aware of, but there's one in particular I wish to share. He looked over the feeble so-called elders, letting his words sink into their ears. You see, I'm not the scared little pup I was when I left here. You might say I've matured. I've gained more knowledge than this entire council combined, and I have the power to escape age. These two details have made me more than any of you will ever be. He paced in front of them, adding to his insubordination. I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's not me, it's you. By the rights of our people, I hereby disband this council of elders. He gave a sadistic smile to each of them, finishing his statement. You're dismissed. The once whispering elders stood, outraged by his insolence, demanding to be shown proper respect. Of all their voices, he heard one in particular. What's the meaning of this betrayal? Naziel glared at the old man. His taunts and mockery lingered in his memory. The meaning of this, old man, he explained, is that you're no longer needed to lead our people. The wide smile he held on his face. Snapping his fingers, he watched the inflated ego of the abusive elder take hold. Cronus's head grew twice as wide as nearly twice its original size. With a sickening pop, it exploded, sending bits of skull and brain matter against the wall behind him. The elders, save for Medelia, panicked, rushing towards the shattered exit, trying to escape their doomed fates. Nazial slaughtered them, taking pleasure with each kill. All but the eldest lay dead on the cavern floor. He approached the woman, still sitting calmly in her chair. "You're a smart woman. Serve my purposes, and you'll be around much longer than you intended. The commanders are loyal to you. Bring me their obedience. We march for Mard, our keep, within the month." He turned, stepping over the bodies littering the floor. "Oh, and Adelia. I know you were the one responsible for sending me to the book. You have my thanks for that. But just so we're clear, I'm the sole ruler of our people. I'll remain so until someone emerges to take that status away from me." Nadelia nodded, her expression solemn and absolute. "As it should be, my lord." And that is it for Chapter 10. That's all I got. We'll be back next week. I'm going to try to remain on the schedule of getting these damn things done. On track. As I said at the beginning, Damn It Bree will be done by the end of this month. Not too far from its completion right now. Order of the Trident 1, I sent it off to the editor. He's doing extremely well with it. Should be finished with it, I'm told, probably by next week. But, I was quoted towards middle of April, so we're in no real hurry for that one. It'll be done, and there's not a lot changed in it, just some grammar stuff. So if you've already got the old book, about the only thing that's going to change is a few grammar things and then a little bit of layout stuff. As you know, Order of the Trident 2 is out, finished, and ready. And then here pretty soon, Order of the Trident 3 will be my sole focus, and we'll get the Order of the Trident section of this world taken care of. After that, we're going to jump into a book I've got titled Bloodlines, which takes place a couple thousand years earlier. Some of the characters that you meet in Book 3, you will get to meet again as the main characters in Bloodlines. But that's what I've got on the agenda. Check out my blog post tomorrow. It should go live around 1 o'clock. It talks about using Facebook to market your stuff, and just some of the stuff I've had to deal with and work on lately. But I'm going to get off here and get back to work. You guys have a good night, and thanks for watching.